Last year, call home that house in Nebraska. Okay, it's not funny. It's not funny to joke about Borrasca. It's not funny to joke about Ethel Cain. But there's not going to be any laughs for the next, hopefully not 2-hour runtime of this video. And every time I see the word Borrasca, I think of Ethel Cain's house in Nebraska. I'm sorry. Let's move on. Hello, my name is Glitchwitch. .jpg, but you could just call me Glitchwitch. We're friends here. We're gonna be friends. After this experience, we're all gonna get to know each other very well. I make videos about internet horror, analog horror, creepypastas, urban legends, all that fun stuff. And today, we're going back to creepypasta. It's been a minute since I dabbled in creepypasta. I've been doing a lot of analog horror content. I wanted to take a little bit of a break for a myriad of reasons. I'm so excited to talk about what I'm going to talk about today. I've honestly been planning on making this video. My cats are both here for the show. This is not an appropriate story for little babies like you, but luckily you don't understand English, so I think they'll be okay. I have been avoiding making this video because I am nervous, A, that I won't do it justice, and B, it's just a pretty heavy subject matter, and I haven't covered subject matter this heavy for my YouTube channel, so we're gonna see what happens. Really, this is a story that means a lot to me, and I really just wanted to talk about it, so this isn't gonna be some deep literary analysis. This is someone who loves this story, hopefully talking to a bunch of people who also love this story or are intrigued by this story, or, you know, maybe have heard things about it and are scared to dive into it on their own and want someone to, you know, hold your hand through it, which I get. Borrasca, the star of the show here, the creepypasta in question, is a 2015 creepypasta that was originally posted on the subreddit r/nosleep in 4 parts by writer Rebecca Klingel under the pseudonym CK Walker. Since its publication, it has earned a reputation as one of the most disturbing and also well-written stories that are considered creepypasta. It was received so well that it even resulted in Rebecca Klingel being hired to work on Haunting of Hill House. There was even an audio adaptation produced by and starring one of my most problematic faves, Cole Sprouse.
If you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in. Have you ever seen me without this stupid hat on? That's weird.
I love Riverdale. I have admitted this before on my channel. I am fascinated by the creepypasta, but I missed a lot of it when it was actually happening. So, you know, 2015 is honestly, to me, felt late for creepypasta. Like, I thought the heyday had passed by then, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not sure. As I said, I'm kind of an outsider looking in. You know, I knew the basics, that kind of thing. I had heard about Borrasca, but I did not consume it until the past couple of months when Wendigoon covered it on his podcast Creepcast, and from there, I was just hooked. Like, since I listened to that, I have not been able to stop thinking about this story. And I will say, I don't think that's the best way to consume it for the first time, as is my video, maybe not the best way to consume that for the first time. So I'm gonna get into some guidelines of what's going on, how this video is gonna work, and maybe some advice for how to approach Borrasca if you are new to Borrasca. First of all, I can't read this entire story to you. It would just take too long. It's not a crazy long read on your own. It's definitely longer than your average creepypasta, but if you look at much more talented narrators than myself on YouTube, we're looking over 2 hours. I'm not gonna sit here and read it verbatim to you. That is not my skill set. I just don't want to waste your time. Instead, I am going to summarize each parts 1 through 4. There is a part 5. I will address that at the end. We will not be covering it today, though. After I summarize it, I will do a little brief discussion about that section and where we are in the story and my thoughts. And then at the end, I have some, like, more big picture ideas that I want to discuss and just why I think it's such a successful story and such a pillar of the creepypasta community. That being said, if you have not read Borrasca and are interested in this story, I encourage you to go read it or listen to it, because my cat has a ping pong ball, sorry. I encourage you to go read it, linked below, listen to someone narrate it, or listen to the QCode podcast, the Cole Sprouse podcast, and then come back to this video. I personally will say this is a Glitch Witch verified statement. To me, the perfect way to consume Borrasca is the QCode podcast. However, I will be basing this video on the original r/no-sleep posts. The QCode podcast is kind of expanded, like Rebecca went back and added some things, fleshed it out a little bit, and I think it's super successful. I really think it is Borrasca in its purest form. And you know, you may disagree with me, and that's fine. I just really enjoyed it. It added a lot to it. The performances are incredible, but I am gonna stick to the original just because we are talking creepypasta, and what is more creepypasta than a 4-part post on r/no-sleep. So if you do go and listen to the QCode podcast, or you've only ever listened to the QCode podcast and I'm just like leaving major things out, it's because it wasn't originally in the no sleep post. This is my last note. It's a big one. This story contains deeply upsetting and disturbing themes. There's no beating around the bush. I'm shortly gonna put a list of content warnings up on the screen. I am, however, going to give a timestamp to when they're over, because I do think the warnings spoil the story, and as someone who knows, you know, I knew my limits going into Borrasca. I'd heard that it was the most disturbing creepypasta ever and all that. I went in knowing nothing, and I do think the experience was richer for that. However, if you are someone who, you know, you don't want to get upset, but you are interested in this, please look at the warnings. I want people to feel safe on this channel. I want people to not, you know, we're talking about scary stuff, but if you need to go in with a little bit of armor, suit up, baby. There's nothing wrong with that. I will say I am not going to, because I'm summarizing, I'm maybe not gonna get as gnarly as the story actually is. A, because I'm not super comfortable doing that, and B, YouTube wouldn't let me anyway, let's be real. If you are someone who is maybe a little scared or uncomfortable to read the story, but you're interested about, you know, Borrasca's impact on creepypasta and internet horror, and you just want to listen to me talk about it and kind of summarize it, this may be the perfect video for you. If you are interested in actually reading it, please go read it or listen to it. Timestamp is up here, and the content warnings are going to happen now. Okay, so yes, if you like my videos and you've been watching my videos and you like I don't know, like my analog horror content, but this maybe feels like a bit much, I'm not offended. You can click away. I'm make another video next week. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not offended. This is a heavy subject. So I'm not offended at all. So without further ado, let's start Borrasca. We meet Sam Walker, our protagonist, and him and his family are moving to Drisking, Missouri when he is in the 4th grade. He believes that his father, who is a cop, may have done something to get him in trouble, and they have quietly moved him to a smaller town. They're moving from St. Louis. Sam's excited by the move because he's young, it's a new place, he can meet new friends, but his 14-year-old sister Whitney is just distraught to leave her friends and her boyfriend. Sam meets and befriends his neighbor Kyle Landy and Kyle's best friend Kimber almost immediately, and the three spend the entire summer together, and the two Drisking locals introduce Sam to a local legend, the Triple Tree. Sam, Kyle, Kimber, and Kyle's little brother Parker venture into the woods to the Triple Tree, where Sam and Parker have to do a ceremony where they carve their names into the tree and recite the traditional phrase, quote, "Underneath the triple tree, there is a man who waits for me. And should I go or should I stay, my fate's the same, either way." While hanging out in the treehouse, the kids are interrupted by a horrific screeching sound up the mountain. Sam is horrified, he's never heard this before, but Kyle and Kimber just kind of act like it's normal and avoid his questions, and Kyle passes it off as, quote, a thing we hear in town sometimes, and just brushes it off like it's not a big deal. Eventually, Kimber quietly answers that it's Borrasca. This is met with, obviously, more questions by Sam, and the two reveal that Borrasca is a place where, quote, bad things happen. And local legends talk about skinned men who live in there, but Kyle brushes the skinned men off as a kid's legend. Despite this, Kyle and Kimber do their best to drop the Borrasca conversation. The kids start the school year and run into Sheriff Clary, Sam's dad's boss. The Borrasca noise sounds off again, and Phil Saunders, a fellow 4th grader, refers to the skinned men, saying a local girl's sister saw them once before disappearing for good. Sam presses Phil for more information on Borrasca, but he too shuts it down to a place where bad things happen. Borrasca doesn't sound again until December, when Sam asks his dad if he knows what it is. His dad says it's a logging operation and blames Whitney for filling Sam's head with the nonsense stories about skinned men in Borrasca. Sam unsuccessfully tries to explain that Whitney did not tell him these things. After the Christmas break, Sam and his classmates get a presentation on the history of Drisking, led by Catherine Scanlon, the head of the Drisking Preservation Society, and Jimmy Prescott, the son of the town's richest man. Prescott explains his family came in and saved the town in the 1950s after the mines closed. After the presentation, Kimber and Kyle tell Sam the mines were blown up after kids died exploring in them. Kyle jokes about them using C4 to explode the mines and how the drinking water was contaminated with C4 so that they could blow up at any moment. This would be the last normal moment of Sam Walker's life. Sam is brought to the office where he finds his mother crying. She is there to take him home, and he presses her asking if something happened to his dad. His dad's a cop after all. That's the normal assumption. If a family emergency or tragedy happened, something happened to his dad in the line of fire. It's not his dad though. It's Whitney. Sam's parents claim she ran away to join her old boyfriend back in St. Louis, but Sam doesn't buy it. She has a new boyfriend and new friends. Unsure what to do, Sam and his friends venture up to the triple tree, and his fears are confirmed. Whitney's name is freshly carved into the tree, and Borrasca screams. Touch base here with part 1. There is an inherent Stephen King feeling I get from the first part of Borrasca. It's the kids on bikes trope, if you will, that you get used to with things like Stand By Me, It, Stranger Things, but here it just feels so real. And of course, I'm summarizing, I'm not reading it, but if you go and actually read or listen to the story, the dialogue between Sam and his friends just feels so real. It actually feels like how kids talk to each other, which I think is really refreshing. Because sometimes when adults write kids, it feels fake or they're like too cutesy. I just think it's done very well. I think one of the strongest things about this first part is the way that the mystery is laid out, but provides pretty much zero actual information. I was hooked when I first listened to this. We're left with, what the hell is Borrasca? Where did the Skin Men legend come from? What is the Scream? How did the Prescott save the town? Where did the Triple Tree ritual come from? And all of these questions are so interesting that you just want to read on and know what the hell is going on. Now, if you've read or listened to Borrasca, like I told you, you'll notice some things off the bat that make your heart sink when you revisit it again. And I can say these without spoiling it, I think. You know, Sam's dad's questionable departure from St. Louis, for example. Kyle's C4 joke. A reread or re-listen of Borrasca is a very rich experience because it feels so meticulously plotted out right from the get-go, despite not spoiling anything. And the third hack still hits you like a semi-truck on your first read. It just is a gut punch. And I think this rereadability and this well-plotted mystery within it is what's kept it in my brain rent-free, as the kids used to say. I don't think the kids still say that since I read it for the past few months. So that's all I really have to say right now. Let's get on to part 2. Part 2 starts with a 16-year-old Sam Walker asleep at his job, awoken by Jimmy Prescott. Prescott owns the sandwich shop that Sam works at, and he wants to speak with the manager, Mira. Of course, Jimmy Prescott, who owns the entire town, wants to speak to the manager. The shop is barely doing business, so Mira lets Sam take the day. He meets up with Kyle and Kimber, who are now dating. Kyle complains about Prescott, and Kimber talks about his dad, Tom, who was hauled off to a home because of his dementia. Phil Saunders and his friend Mike join the group, and Mike laments about it being his cousin's death anniversary. She disappeared into the woods like so many others. Sam has never given up on Whitney, meticulously following her ex-boyfriend's socials for proof of his parents' runaway theory, to no avail. His dad, now the sheriff, refuses to acknowledge this. Kimber retreats from the group, claiming she needs to spend time with her mom, who is depressed. Kyle seems agitated by her mom's neediness and apparent hatred of him. On the sophomore ditch day, Sam shows up to work at the shop early and finds Mira in an almost completely broken down state. He eventually calls her husband Owen, fearful of leaving her alone to just cry. Sam thinks she's upset about the store's failure, but Owen confides that he and Mira are having trouble conceiving. Mira is obsessed with having a baby to carry on her bloodline because all her uncles were killed in the mine incident that led to the explosion. Hearing him speak about the mountains, Sam presses him about Borrasca and the Skin Men. Owen responds, "What does a Borrasca have to do with anything?" Before Mira comes out telling Owen she, quote, "wants to do it, and I called him." The two send Sam home early. Sam tells Kyle about Mira's family, the McCaskies, being the one from the mine incident, and asks him if he thinks that has anything to do with the disappearances. Up until this point, Sam has hid his interest in Borrasca and its potential connection to Whitney from both Kyle and Kimber. Hungry for more information, Sam and Kyle visit Catherine Scanlon at the Preservation Society for more information. She explains that the bodies could never be recovered because the mines were so unsafe. Drisking, already poor and suffering because of the mine droughts, hired a shoddy company to explode the mines, and the water table became infected. 2 years later, the Prescotts helped revitalize the town. Sam and his friends seek out Jimmy's dad at his hospice care facility for more information. Tom Prescott rants to Kimber, thinking she's a relative of Mira, that Drisking will always be his town, no matter what anyone says. He alludes to an unassuming Powder and claims the town was always happy to take his money. Tom complains about how Jimmy has ruined his legacy and made the entire town run on powder. After visiting Tom, Kyle worries they've gone too far looking into this, worried about the safety of proceeding. Their debate is broken up by a call from Kimber's dad. Her mom had driven to the hospital and jumped from the roof, living long enough to apologize to the EMT who found her. Okay, part 2. When I first listened to Borrasca, I was surprised by the time jump. I didn't expect it. There is a real hollowness that comes with finding out that Whitney's just been gone for 7 years with no answers, and everyone except Sam has pretty much given up, and even Sam is just kind of quietly keeping to himself about it. All of our characters still feel like their younger counterparts, just aged up, but the dynamic of the town feels a little bit different. Viewing Drisking through the eyes of a 9-year-old gives us this kind of like idyllic, outdoorsy, small town, but viewing it through the eyes of a jaded 16-year-old starts to kind of show the cracks. The business is owned by the Prescotts, like Mira's sandwich shop, all seem to be failing, yet the Prescotts and the town are thriving. Sam's dad, with all the power at his disposal as sheriff to find his daughter, just chooses to do nothing. Sam's willingness to finally talk about Whitney and what he believes is a potential connection to Borrasca shows a boiling point for him. He can't take it anymore. It's consumed him for 7 years. The mild, hopeful feeling that you got from part 1 is all but sucked away in part 2. The whole kids on bikes thing is just gone. It's such a hard shift. Yeah, there's still playful banter between Sam and his friends, but there's like this black cloud looming over the story at this point, and it just gets darker and darker and darker. You feel this oppressive heaviness as each part goes on. When I originally listened to this, I was immediately taken aback by Mira and her storyline in part 2. There just felt like there was something not right. As I said, I listened to the Creepcast episode, and Wendigoon even made note of it, not spoiling anything, but saying that Mira's storyline made him, made some things click. He remembered where the story ends up going because of it. And I think that the mysteries that we got in part 1 are traded out for some very realistic feeling dilemmas in the second part. Mira's infertility, the powder business, which could be drugs, and the spoiled water supply. The monsters and legends are kind of fading into the background for more real-world problems. And that makes sense because Sam is growing up, and he's growing up at a rate way faster than a normal teenager because his sister disappeared, and that's a really heavy thing for a kid to take on. So let's move on to part 3. Things are going to start heating up. Part 3 finds Kyle in a panic because Kimber hasn't been answering his calls or texts. Sam overheard Kimber's dad mention a suicide note, but his father denies it existing. Kyle says he does not trust Sam's dad. Kimber finally returns to school, and they ask her about the letter. She says her dad told her there was a note initially, but then said he was mistaken. Kimber doesn't believe him, and it seems that not believing dads has just become a theme in this story. She reveals that the letter mentioned the Prescotts, and that she knows that it's hidden somewhere in her dad's office. She worries that he's hidden it because he resents her for being the only one to receive a letter. The three hatch a plan to get Kimber out of her mom's service so she and Kyle can retrieve the letter while her dad is occupied. The plan backfires when Mr. DeStar refuses to let Kyle leave with Kimber, resulting in Kimber sneaking off on her own. Back at the service, as time passes, Sam and Kyle begin to worry as Kimber fails to respond to them. Her dad is seen arguing with former Sheriff Cleary and his deputies, causing the boys to assume something bad is happening. Panicked that Kimber was in danger, Sam and Kyle get a ride from Phil, attempting to reach Kimber before Cleary. Kimber finally responds saying, quote, "I found it, and they're here." Her house was empty when they arrived. Sam's dad claims that Kimber's dad forced her to leave town to be with family in California, but they don't buy it. Sam and Kyle, convinced it's connected to Borrasca, venture to the treehouse but find nothing to help them. For days, Sam and Kyle searched the woods for any sign of Kimber, but found nothing. 11 days after her disappearance, Borrasca screamed. Shit hits the fan in part 3, to be perfectly honest. It shifts in a way that I didn't think it was gonna get as real with our main, trio, but it does. And it starts to feel very desperate and very panicky. The entire funeral sequence of Borrasca is so tense, it made me anxious. This is when you really feel the scope of what these kids have stumbled into. There is something bigger than them happening in this town. We still don't know exactly what's happening, but we know it's real and we know it is deeply serious. I want to say, this is last warning, if you are uncomfortable with explicit or adult themes, please skip ahead to the 4 debrief for the final discussion because my description of part 4 may be a little upsetting. I am going to try to sanitize it as much as possible, but it's still pretty heavy. So, last warning, let's do part 4, final part of Borrasca. Kyle assumes that Kimber is dead because of the scream, but the two continue to look for her. Kyle forces his anger on Jimmy Prescott, knowing he has some level of involvement, and wonders if he's kidnapping people to be drug mules because of Tom's powder comments. Sam runs into Mira, more cheerful than he's ever seen her, and explains that they're looking for Borrasca and for Kimber. Mira brushes Borrasca off as a child's tale and reiterates that Kimber is in California. Hello, it's Editing Glitchwitch, here from the future to let you know that I missed a major part that will make everything make more sense. When Sam runs into Mira and they're talking about Kimber, Mira is pregnant. She couldn't get pregnant, they're struggling to get pregnant. She's expecting. So remember that. Okay. Back to me from 3 days ago. This interaction reminds Sam of Owen referring to a Borrasca, meaning what they are looking for could be a thing rather than a place. They return to Catherine for answers, and she tells them a Borrasca is the first mine within a mine system to run dry. She gives them a map leading to the Borrasca, and they set out. After hiking for hours, they run across an ancient-looking sign that once read Drisking Underground Mine, faded down to Skin and Men. The skin men were real. The boys eventually find the mine and the multiple boarded-up buildings in front of it. When they sneak into the first building, they're met with a giant metal machine that Sam concludes is the source of the scream and of the deaths. They move on from there and see Jimmy's truck before sneaking into another building. Upon entering this building, the boys find stockpiles of supplies, an overwhelming stench, and more horrifically, tons of people. Rows and rows of mattresses contain dozens of girls, many pregnant, strapped down, or both. Sam loses Kyle after he stumbles upon Jimmy assaulting their old classmate, Christy. Sam runs off to find Kyle with Kimber, attempting to free her. Jimmy follows after them. During their attempt to flee, Sam sees Whitney. He urges his friends to go on, because he can't just leave her there. Jimmy, vain and smug as ever, reveals to Sam that this is the family business. Prescotts have sold babies since the 1950s, when his father initially sold his own son to help save Drisking. The Stables, as Jimmy refers to the operation, has also been responsible for producing what he calls community service babies for women in town left infertile from the contaminated drinking water. Whitney is currently carrying one of those babies, and Jimmy says after that, she will likely meet the shiny gentleman afterwards, referring to her eventual deaths at the hand of the large machine. Cleary comes back with a badly beat up Kyle, but Kimber managed to evade him. After failing to get information about Kimber from Kyle, Jimmy beats him to near death. Jimmy lets Sam go because of his father, and Sam runs away with Kyle, desperate to save his life. After arriving at the hospital, Sam finds out he's been pinned for Kyle's attack and is forced into homelessness, the entire town viewing him as a deranged, violent criminal. Kyle survives the attack, but is left non-verbal and non-communicative. Nothing is done to stop the crimes on the mountains. Years later, while living in Chicago, Sam receives the letter from Kimber's mom. And this will be the one thing that I read in its entirety. My Kimber, I know you aren't going to understand why we did the things we did. It was all born out of love. At least it started that way. You're everything to me, and you'll always be my daughter. Do you understand? And I'm leaving this world because of what I've done to you, not because of who you are. I don't want you to be upset about what you are, because who you are is beautiful. My dearest, this town has done horrible things, and all of us who live here are guilty. Read this letter and leave this place. I need to tell you all of this. I need to start at the beginning. Somewhere along the way, decades ago, the major population of Drisking became unable to bear children. Most people blame the town for letting the iron ores leak into our water table during the collapse of the mines. This is the same water table that still provides the town's water today. They were never quite able to fix it, and ore is toxic, and exposure causes infertility. The town did, and still does, suffer greatly from its effects. And the Prescotts, they solved the problem that no one could solve. It was an ugly, crass solution, but most people were happy to look away when they were able to raise families again. You see, they took girls, mostly women from other places, and they impregnated them and gave us their babies. And the town came under the care of Thomas Prescott when he started to sell some of the babies on the side for profit to rich couples. And the sheriff, he helped him do this. But then an ugly rumor started that they were selling to human traffickers. And the Prescotts had to offer triple the price for girls. And in town, we began to murmur. But we once again turned the other cheek when the city was suddenly flooded with money because of how well the traffickers paid. People had well-paying jobs again and were proud to call Drisking home. So we said nothing, and those that did were taken to the mountain. Because that is where they do it. There is a place on the mountain where the women are taken, Kimber. Drifters, runaways, and if their parents choose it, sometimes the girls in town are even sold back. They arrange to sell the girls, and they meet them at a tree halfway between our town and their baby mill. Sometimes kids play there now. I think you played there. The Prescotts and the sheriff are the ones who impregnate the girls, and the children are named after them. P children for the Prescotts, and K children for the sheriff. And then when the women become too sick or too old to deliver profitable babies, they are sent through a giant machine that was used to refine ore, and their bodies are crushed, and the blood and skin stripped away, and what remains of them are their stolen children and the dust of their bones. And all that's left of their bodies is the powder that they spread over the mountain to hide our crimes. I'm telling you this, Kimber, because you are one of those children. Most of your friends are one of those children. Please get out of Drisking before your father finds this letter. Run away and never come back, and never speak of it to anyone. Their industry has deep roots now, and the traffickers have lofty connections. Don't tell anyone. Don't keep this letter. Don't look back. I love you. I'm sorry I have to leave you. We all have to answer for our sins, and I'm ready to burn in hell for mine. Love always and forever. Mom. And that is the end, the initial run of Borrasca. So, part 4 is what gives this story its notorious title of Most Disturbing Creepypasta. Rightfully so. When I went into Borrasca originally, I expected something like graphically gory and over the top, the way that movies you see in top 10 most disturbing movies lists have. But instead, it's just deeply, deeply uncomfortable with a unexpectedly real reveal at the end. I didn't go into explicit detail with part 4, besides the letter, I guess, because I can't with YouTube. Y'all know that. But also, I really, I'm not comfortable maybe saying some of those things out loud as well. But don't mistake that choice for me condemning Rebecca Klingel for going there, because I think that's what makes Borrasca really, really work at the end of the day. When I first listened to the story as it was read on Creepcast, I had to stop working and rewind because it was such an abrupt shift that I couldn't believe it was happening. But I think that's such a great choice, and even in Creepcast I think they didn't go verbatim because they were not comfortable saying it. So I do encourage you to reading it is going to be the most graphic. Even the QCode podcast doesn't get as graphic as the actual written story does. Going into it, Sam and Kyle, they know that something bad's gonna happen, right? They know they're going into something bad. But it's too late to do anything or understand the magnitude of the situation until they literally fall into it. In fiction, we often find our heroes slowly piecing things together meticulously, and then they reach a final aha moment and can go in and save the day. But in Borrasca, Sam's grasping at straws really until the very end. He's met with so many dead ends, and then finally remembering that little thing Owen said leads him where he needs to go. It's so inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. The desperation of the situation feels real, not like a perfectly crafted detective story. And I really, truly, when I first went into this, had no clue what the conclusion to the mystery of Borrasca was going to be. Maybe I'm just naive, or maybe I'm not as intelligent of a reader as other people, but I thought that Klingel did a just expert job of not giving anything away, but sprinkling breadcrumbs throughout the whole story that make everything click once you know what happens. Bombshells like the powder, and Kimber and Kyle being siblings, when you know, it just makes you go back and everything makes sense. Tom talking about the powder and how the whole town runs on powder now. That wasn't originally the plan. You know, Kimber's mom being so against her dating Kyle because they're blood related. So it's just, it's so good. I love it. I feel weird saying I love it because it's such a sad and horrific story with no happy ending. I mean, Kimber gets away. That's a positive, but everything else is just sad. It's so deeply sad. That is my breakdown. I am going to just talk a little bit about why I think Borrasca is a hallmark highlight of creepypasta on the whole, and why it is so precious to this lovely little genre we call internet horror. Horror literature has been around as long as literature has existed, but the past couple of decades have been dominated by Mr. Stephen King, as I mentioned him earlier. His resume is unmatched. He spawned some of the most iconic books and films in the horror genre, but one could argue that at some point he almost became a subgenre of horror himself. Though he has slowed down, in the past couple of years, new generations of writers found a passion for horror online writing called creepypasta. Klingel and Borrasca live somewhere in the middle of these two horror subgenres. I think in ways Borrasca sails above both of them. As I said earlier, part 1 of Borrasca feels quintessentially Stephen King, but once we hit that time jump of part 2, she does something that I think that King was unable to do with the aforementioned It. In It, the second part, when the kids are grown, feels a little off, perhaps because the monster they are fighting seems far less real and scary when they're 35-year-old adults with mortgages and families. Which is something that is very apparent in the 2019 film adaptation. I'm sorry. And Klingel may get some grace because Sam only ages up 7 years, but I think that she does a great job of creating this dark and oppressive energy that permeates parts 2 through 4 and just grows and grows until you reach that boiling point of finding the stables on the mountain. And you know, the skin men and the shiny gentlemen aren't monsters from children's stories. They're your neighbors and your friends. And they're worse than you could ever fathom. It's so much worse than a creature that goes bump in the night. And that's not to say that Stephen King isn't a master of men are the real monsters. He's done that a ton. But I think that the stark tonal shift of Borrasca is one of the strongest suits of it, and you don't always get that from aged up kids on bikes stories. While I don't expect a show like Stranger Things that's so family friendly to reach Borrasca levels of depravity, characters could evolve and become more nuanced and real feeling like Sam does, but instead they just kind of look like really tall 11-year-olds and feel like really tall 11-year-olds. Now I'm sure you'd assume, because I just had the audacity to like low-key shit on Stephen King, he can take it, he's fine, he has millions, that I'd spend the next 20 minutes talking about how creepypasta sucks and Borrasca's better and shouldn't be considered creepypasta. So yeah, I say absolutely the not, because who do you think's talking here? What do we talk about here? We don't talk about literature, we talk about internet horror. This is a creepypasta, and it is proof that creepypasta can be good as Sure, a vast majority of creepypasta is cringy and poorly written. I made a video on Carmen Winstead, okay? I know. But for an entire generation of kids, this was horror. It's easy to only remember Jeff the Killer, but hiding amongst the Jeff the Killers and the Smile Dogs, which I don't even think Smile Dog's that bad, you had Candle Cove, Pen Pal, Search and Rescue, and Borrasca. There is a universe where creepypasta didn't exist, and we never got Borrasca because a young writer may have had nowhere to put her story out. Borrasca is such a success that Mike Flanagan, the celebrated director of The Haunting of Hill House and Midnight Mass, one of my personal favorites, I love Midnight Mass, go watch Midnight Mass, hired Klingel as a staff writer because he was so obsessed with Borrasca. Creepypasta is as much of a touch point in the history of horror literature as any other genre or format, and works like Borrasca have helped legitimize it. Borrasca is not good despite being a creepypasta. It is a good creepypasta, and there's nothing wrong with that. And of course, I think that Borrasca is different than a lot of creepypasta, at least traditional creepypasta. There's not a creature or something like that. We got it on r/no sleep. It's a creepypasta. You can't fight it. This last thing I want to talk about is as heavy as I will probably get, and it's a heavy story, so why not get a little heavy? When you first start reading Borrasca, you would never think that it's a story that's going to revolve centrally around the suffering of women. Our protagonist is a young boy, and most of the supporting characters, save for Whitney, Kimber, and Catherine, are male. I think this is an absolutely deliberate choice. In real life, women's suffering lays quietly in the background of everything else. It is just a truth that we all accept because we feel like we can't do anything about it. The reality of our country now is that women are forced to give birth, women are arrested for miscarrying a baby they so badly wanted, and women die giving birth because doctors just don't care enough. And life just goes on. I often see people use The Handmaid's Tale as the ultimate example of where American reproductive rights are going. But in a weird, f***ed up way, Borrasca feels more tangible. Sure, it's extreme for an entire town to buy in on an operation like this, but Sadly, there's no way that something like this doesn't exist on a smaller scale somewhere in the world and somewhere in this country. As the reproductive rights in this country continue to be stripped away, there will be more and more room for small-scale versions of horrors like this to actually occur. This is why I applaud Klingel's lack of censoring the brutality of Part 4, because it forces you to come to terms with how brutal the situation is, and it makes the reader deeply uncomfortable. And uncomfortable is one of the most powerful feelings you can harness, because uncomfortable stays under your skin. Fear fades, horror fades, shock fades, uncomfortable stays. And that's why this story has stayed with me. The lack of confronting the horrors we're facing as a country are what resign us to the dreaded, this is just how things are. So, I'm not going to change anything with one YouTube video that maybe 1,000 people will see, but I think that stories like this about how women can be taken advantage of and treated like, animals need to exist, because it forces us to re-examine our actual lives and how women are actually treated in this country. I had to make this video because I haven't had any sort of media stick with me the way that Borrasca has. The second I finished the Creepcast episode, I went and read it, and the second that I finished reading it, I went and listened to the QCode adaptation. It haunts me, and it simultaneously comforts me in the way that only good horror can. It's one of those rare stories that gives you a completely new experience upon a revisit. While the initial shock and horror of the ending is gone, you can piece it all together throughout the entire duration. I encourage anyone who hasn't listened to the audio play to give it a try. I think it truly is the ultimate form of Borrasca, and it's my personal favorite. There is a part 5 that Klingel wrote, and that was eventually adapted into season 2 of the podcast, and I have mixed feelings on it, but I didn't want to lengthen this episode anymore. I'm sure it's going to be kind of long, but I honestly may give that its own shorter video in the future, because I do think it's interesting, and I think there's something to be said about sequels on the whole when it comes to Borrasca Part 5 or Season 2 of the QCode podcast. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of Borrasca. Let me think of other creepypastas that you consider kind of the top tier creepypasta, because I know they're out there and I would love to read them and cover them. Really, if you want me to make a video about anything, please let me know. I'm open. Analog horror, digital horror, creepypastas, internet urban legends, random internet stuff. And I promise I won't disappear again for 2 weeks, for those of you who actually watch me consistently. It was just weird. I was kind of sick. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.